Left for Dead, a legless alien warrior's only hope on human marine HFY. Smoke and blood choked there. The battlefield was silent, except for the crackling fires and the distant groans of the dying. Commander Zelara of the Valkyrie lay motionless, her once proud legs severed just above the knees, her violet blood pooling around her battered form. She had fought with honor. Her twin plasma blades had cut through Terran forces like a comet through the void. But in the end, sheer numbers had overwhelmed her. The last thing she remembered was the explosion, blinding light, searing heat and darkness. Now, consciousness returned in painful fragments. Her armor's biosensors were failing, her body struggling to heal without the non-eater reserves necessary to regrow lost limbs. She was dying, and no one would come for her. The Valkyrie did not rescue the fallen. To be left behind was to be unworthy. Her squad had already moved on, no doubt presuming her dead. She was alone, or so she thought. A shadow moved between the flickering flames. Heavy boots crunched against scorched earth. A figure knelt beside Terran, clad in battered marine armor, his rifle slung across his back. He removed his helmet, revealing a scarred face, short-cropped dark hair, and weary brown eyes. Sergeant Alex Carter. Zelara bared her teeth, a weak but defiant snarl. And it, human? But Carter didn't raise his weapon. Instead, he pulled a canteen from his belt and held it to her lips. Drink! She hesitated. It could be poison. Then again, what did it matter? She was dead either way. She drank. The water was warm, metallic tasting, but life-giving. Carter sighed, looking around. Your people really left you? Zelara exhaled sharply. The weak are abandoned. It is our way. He scoffed. Hell of a way. She turned her head to glare at him. Your pity is wasted, human. He shrugged. Not pity, just don't like leaving good soldiers to die. He moved quickly, pulling out a medkit. She tried to protest as he injected a coagulant into her wounds, but she was too weak to resist. I should kill you, she rasped. Yeah, he said, securing bandages around her stumps. You probably should. She studied him. His hands were steady, his movements efficient. This was not a man offering kindness out of weakness. He had seen war, just as she had. Why are you doing this? Carter leaned back, running a hand through his grimy hair. Because I've been left behind too. Zelara blinked. Your own people abandoned you. He nodded. Evac shuttle took off before I could reach it. Command thinks I'm dead, and I would be, if I didn't find cover. He gestured to her. Then I found you. For the first time in her life, Zelara felt something for an uncertainty. Her entire existence had been shaped by the Valkyrie code, strength above all, weakness discarded. Yet here was a human, defying logic, refusing to leave even an enemy behind. A foolish act. A noble act. She wasn't sure which. Can you walk? He asked, then winced. Dumb question. Okay, plan D. He moved behind her, carefully lifting her onto his back. She stiffened at the indignity of it, but the warmth of his body and the steady grip of his arms made it clear wouldn't drop her. You carry me as a trophy, she muttered. Carter chuckled. Nah, just don't feel like dying alone. As he started walking, Zelara let her head rest lightly against his shoulder. Perhaps, just this once, strength wasn't in standing alone. Perhaps it was in having someone refuse to leave you behind. For the first time, a human was her only hope, and for some reason, she trusted him. Left for Dead, a legless alien warrior's only hope on human marine HFY. Part 2. Carter moved through the ruined battlefield with Zelara strapped to his back, his boots crunching against scorched rubble. Every step was agony. His body was battered, his ribs bruised, and dehydration gnawed at him, but he pushed forward. Zelara was heavy, not unmanageable, but her Valkyrie physiology meant she was denser than a human. Her remaining armor plates pressed into his back, and the scent of her alien blood, sharp like burned metal, mixed with the acrid smoke in the air. She was silent for a long while. Then, in a tired voice, she asked, Where are we going? Somewhere that isn't here. Zelara huffed. Brilliant strategy. Carter ignored the jab and adjusted his grip on her. There's an old supply bunker a few clicks west. If we're lucky, there'll be med supplies, rations, maybe even a comm unit. Your people won't come for you. Yeah, he admitted, but they might come looking for survivors. She was quiet again. He could feel her body shifting slightly against his back, as if wrestling with a thought. Finally, she muttered, "My people won't come for me either." Carter already knew that. He had seen it in her eyes the moment she realized she had been left behind. Vrakari doctrine was clearly the strong were worth saving. The silence between them stretched. Eventually, she spoke again, voice softer. "This is a strange feeling." "What is?" "Being carried." Carter smirked. "What? Vrakari don't do piggyback rides." "I do not know what a piggyback is, but I assure you, we do not do it." Carter chuckled. "Well, first time for everything." Another pause. Then, almost too quiet to hear, Zelara muttered, "I hate it." Carter bit back a grin. "You're welcome." The bunker was closer than Carter remembered, but by the time they reached it, his legs felt like lead. It was an old Terran outpost, half buried in rubble, its steel doors warped from past explosions. Still, it was intact enough to provide shelter. Carter lowered Zelara to the ground, groaning as he stretched his stiff back. She sat propped against the wall, her hands pressing against her bandaged wounds. He pulled his sidearm and checked the entrance. The door was stubborn, but after a few well-placed kicks, it groaned open. The interior was dark, still air rushing out. Carter swept the inside with his flashlight. Empty supply crates, a rusted-out comm unit, a few half-melted ration packs. "Not great," he muttered, stepping inside. Behind him, Zelara struggled to pull herself forward with her arms, dragging herself toward the entrance. Carter turned and sighed. "Hold up." He stepped back outside and crouched in front of her. "All right, this is gonna be weird, but I'm not letting you crawl." Before she could protest, he lifted her again, carrying her inside. The moment he set her down, she let out a low growl. "I do not like this." "Noted," Carter said, brushing off his hands. "Now let me see what I can find." He dug through the wreckage. A few tools, a cracked water filtration unit, a dusty first aid kit with barely anything useful inside. Zelara, meanwhile, was inspecting her own wounds. Her breathing was shallow, but controlled. "My people regenerate," she said, slowly, "without the proper nanita injections. My legs will not grow back." Carter sat against the wall across from her. "Would you want them to?" Zelara's mandibles twitched a Vrakari expression. He was learning to read his thoughtfulness. "In truth, I do not know," she admitted. "A warrior without legs is nothing." Carter leaned his head back against the wall, looking up at the cracked ceiling. "Guess that depends on the warrior." She stared at him. "You think I can still fight?" "Maybe," he said, "but either way, being a warrior isn't just about standing. It's about getting back up." Zelara considered his words. For the first time, she wasn't sure if the Vrakari way was the only way. And as she watched this lone human, abandoned by his own kind, yet still fighting to survive, she wondered if there was more to strength than she had been taught. Maybe, just maybe, humans weren't as weak as the Vrakari believed. Maybe this one was stronger than all of them. Left for Dead, a legless alien warrior's only hope on human marine HFY. The bunker was silent, except for the occasional crackle of static from the busted comms panel. Carter sat with his back against the wall, his rifle resting across his lap. Across from him, Zelara remained still, her breathing steady but labored. They had both been left behind, but Carter wasn't planning to die here. He tapped the side of the comm unit, trying to coax some life out of it. The screen flickered weakly, but the transmission link was dead. If there was any chance of getting a signal out, they'd need a higher vantage point. He sighed and turned back to Zelara. "We can't stay here forever." Her mandibles twitched. "You have a plan?" Carter smirked. "Yeah, it's stupid." Zelara exhaled sharply. "A fitting end. Then the escape." Carter found an old field drone tucked away in a storage compartment, its battery nearly dead but still operational. With some quick wiring and a few curses under his breath, he managed to get it moving. He turned to Zelara. "All right, this thing won't carry you, but it's strong enough to help move you across rough terrain. We rig it into a makeshift sled, and I'll pull." Zellora eyed the battered machine, undignified. Carter chuckled. Better than being dead. She hesitated, then gave a slow nod. Using scrap metal and supply straps, Carter fashioned a crude platform for her. Once she was secured, he slung his rifle over his back and gripped the tether. Zellora sighed. If my warriors saw this, I would be mocked for eternity. Carter grinned. Then let's make sure you live long enough to shut them up. They moved through the ruins as the twin suns of Zevis Minus 9 began to rise, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold. The battlefield was eerily quiet now. Most combat had moved on, leaving only the dead and the forgotten. Carter pulled the makeshift sled with slow, deliberate steps. Every muscle burned, but had pushed on. Zellora remained silent, watching him with unreadable eyes. Finally, she spoke. You should leave me. Carter didn't stop. Not happening. You cannot carry me forever. Don't need to, he said, nodding ahead. Just need to reach that ridge. A craggy outcrop loomed ahead, a high vantage point, with a clear view of the surrounding wasteland. If any ships were scanning for survivors, that was the place to be. Zellora looked at him, something shifting in her gaze. You truly mean to save me? Carter didn't hesitate. Yeah. Even though I am your enemy. He glanced back at her. You were. She considered that, then gave a slow nod. The final stand. They reached the ridge, but the moment they crested the top, Carter's stomach dropped. A Rakari South team was already there. 5 warriors, clad in dark armor, their blades humming with plasma energy. Their leader, a towering brute with jagged facial markings, turned at the sound of Carter's approach. Then his gaze fell on Zellora. She straightened, meeting his eyes. Commander Zellora, you still live. Carter exhaled. Finally, some damn luck. But Zellora's expression darkened. You did not come for me, she said, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. The Vrakari warrior tilted his head. You were lost. Yet here I am. The warrior glanced at Carter. A human carried you here? Zellora hesitated. And, slowly, she nodded. The other Vrakari shifted uneasily. Their species did not believe in rescuing the fallen. Survival was a warrior's responsibility. To be carried, to be saved by an enemy, was unthinkable. The leader's eyes narrowed. You should not have returned. Carter's grip tightened on his rifle. He had a bad feeling about this. Zellora must have sensed it too. I am still Vrakari, she said carefully. No, the leader raised his blade. You are weak. He moved to strike. Zellora reacted first. With a sharp twist, she grabbed Carter's combat knife from his belt and flung it. The blade buried itself in the leader's throat with a wet shhk. He staggered, gurgling, then collapsed. The other Vrakari warriors frowned. Zellora locked eyes with them. Who else questions my strength? Silence. One by one, the warriors lowered their weapons. Zellora turned to Carter, breathing hard. You communicate. Carter tossed it to her, and she activated the Vrakari emergency frequency. This is Commander Zellora. I have survived. I require immediate retrieval. A pause, and a voice crackled through. Understood. Transport inbound. Zellora exhaled. She turned back to Carter. You saved my life. Carter smirked. Technically, you just saved mine. Guess we're even. Zellora gave him a long look, and, in a voice softer than he'd ever heard from her, she said, No, we are not. Epilogue. A Vrakari dropship arrived minutes later. Carter was tense, half expecting them to execute him on sight, but Zellora stood beside him, a silent warning to anyone who might question his presence. As they prepared to board, Zellora turned to him. You cannot stay with my people, she said, but I will not forget what you have done. Carter nodded. I'll figure something out. She hesitated, then reached up, removing a small insignia from her shoulder plate. She pressed it into his hand. This marks a warrior's dead, she said. If ever you have need, call upon me. Carter glanced at the insignia, then back at her. I'll hold you to that. She gave him a rare, knowing smirk, and, with one final glance, she turned and boarded the dropship. As it lifted off, Carter stood alone on the ridge, watching it disappear into the sky. He had no idea what came next, but he wasn't dead, and somehow, he had earned the respect and the death of an alien warrior. Not bad for a human left for dead. The end. Left for Dead, a legless alien warrior's only hope on human marine HFY. Carter watched the Valkyrie dropship disappear into the sky, its thrusters kicking up a cloud of dust and ash. He was alone again, but this time, it felt different. He glanced at the insignia Zalara had given him, a small, jagged emblem of blackened metal, worn smooth by battle. A warrior's dead. It didn't mean he was safe. He was still stranded, still on an enemy-occupied planet, and still bleeding from wounds that hadn't fully closed. But for the first time, he had something he never expected of a Valkyrie ally. Carter took a deep breath, then activated his emergency beacon. It was a long shot, but if any Terran forces were still out there, this was his best chance. Now, all he could do was wait. 3 weeks later, Carter leaned back in his bunk, staring at the ceiling of the Terran medical frigate Resurgence. He had been rescued 2 days after Zalara's departure, wrapped up by a recon team that had detected his distress signal. His wounds had healed, and he was already being briefed for redeployment. But something felt off. He wasn't a hero, officially. He was just another survivor of a brutal battle. His reports mentioned nothing of Zalara, and he suspected the Valkyrie had done the same on their end. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that his time on Zavis-9 had changed something. He had seen firsthand that the Valkyrie weren't just mindless warriors. They had codes, honor, pride, and for all their brutal traditions, one of their best had been saved by a human. The thought made him smirk. Then his comm panel beeped. He tapped it. "Carter here." "Sergeant," the officers on the other end said. "You have an encrypted message. Priority transmission." Carter frowned. "From who?" A pause. Then, "It's not Terran. It's Valkyrie." Carter's pulse quickened. He dismissed the officers and pulled up the message. The encryption was unlike anything he had seen, but the system translated it into something simple. A single line. "Your debt is honored. When you have need, call upon me, Zalara." Carter exhaled, then grinned. Maybe he'd never need to cash in that favor. Then again, maybe he would. The end. Left for Dead, a legless alien warrior's only hope on human marine HFY. Final chapter 8 at paid. Carter reads Zalara's message 3 times before leaning back in his chair, exhaling slowly. The war between humanity and the Valkyrie wasn't over it by a long shot, and yet, in the middle of all the bloodshed, he had earned something impossible, the respect of a Valkyrie warrior, a debt. He didn't know if he'd ever use it, but something told him this wasn't the last time he crossed paths with Zalara. For now, though, there were orders to follow, missions to complete, so Carter did what any good Marine would do: shut down the terminal, grabbed his rifle, and prepared for whatever came next. He just had a feeling that, someday, when the universe least expected it, a human and a Valkyrie would fight side by side again. The end. No One Left Behind, a human Marine's promise to an alien brother HFY. The snowstorm howled across the ruined battlefield, turning the world into a swirling vortex of white. Sergeant James Carter pulled his cloak tighter, his breath forming ice crystals on his visor. The battle was over. The Valkyrie had declared it a loss and pulled back, but one of their own still lay out there, buried in the snow. And Carter wasn't leaving without him. "Human, you are a fool." Carter turned to the Valkyrie officers standing beside him. The alien's exoskeletal armor was slick with ice, his 4 black eyes narrowing in contempt. "Commander Zalara is gone," the officers continued. "She fell in combat. The strong survive. Well, weak." Yeah, Carter cut him off, hoisting his rifle. "I've heard your whole survival of the strongest speech before, but we don't leave people behind." The Valkyrie sneered. "She is not one of your people." "She fought beside me," Carter said, stepping away from the safety of the trench. "That makes her my people." The officer scoffed but did not stop him. In Valkyrie culture, a warrior who threw away his life for the dead was already dead himself. Carter ignored him and trudged forward into the storm. The snow was waist deep, the cold biting through his armor. His helmet's side flickered, struggling to track Zalara's last known coordinates. She had been leading the Valkyries' final charge when the enemy's orbital artillery turned the battlefield into a cratered wasteland. Most of her warriors had died instantly. The rest had retreated, but Carter had seen her foul legs crushed beneath a slab of wreckage, blood staining the ice, and he knew she was still out there. He just had to find her before the cold did. Carter's motion tracker pinged. A weak heat signature flickered ahead. He pushed forward, his boots sinking into the snow. Then, through the blinding white, he saw a jagged piece of wreckage, a downed Valkyrie gunship, half buried in ice, and beneath it, a dark figure. Zellora. She was barely conscious, her exoskeletal armor cracked, blood flouncing along her mandibles. One of her lower arms twitched weakly. Carter dropped to one knee beside her. Zellora, you still with me? Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused. See, Carter. Yeah, it's me, he said, pulling a stim pack from his belt. Try not to die, all right? She coughed, a weak chuckle escaping. That would be ideal. He injected the stim into her neck. Almost instantly, her breathing steadied, but she was still too weak to move, and her legs would remain if they were pinned. Carter braced himself and grabbed the wreckage. His muscles screamed as he lifted, pushing with everything he had. Metal groaned, ice cracked, and with one final heave, the debris shifted just enough for him to pull her free. Zellora let out a sharp hiss of pain but didn't cry out. She was Valkyrie, after all. Carter slung her over his shoulders in a fireman's carry. You came back? She murmured, barely holding on. Of course I did, Carter said, adjusting his grip. What, you think I'd let you die out here? She exhaled, her mandibles twitching in something close to a smile. Foolish human. Yeah, save the insults until we're not freezing to death. Then, step by step, he started the long walk back. The journey was brutal. Carter's legs burned, his lungs ached, and every gust of wind threatened to knock them both over, but it pushed on. By the time he reached the trench, the Valkyrie officers were still there, watching. Carter collapsed to his knees, lowering Zellora carefully onto the snow. The officers studied them for a long moment before finally speaking. You would die for a warrior not of your kind. Carter, still gasping for breath, looked up. If they fight beside me, they're worth saving? A long silence followed. Then, to Carter's surprise, the Valkyrie officers gave a slow, deliberate nod. Perhaps, just perhaps, humans weren't as weak as the Valkyrie believed. Epilogue. Zellora survived. The Valkyrie fleet retrieved her, and though her injuries would never fully heal, she lived to fight another day. Carter thought that would be the end of it, but a few weeks later, he received a transmission and encrypted message from an unknown Valkyrie source. It contained only a single line. Your debt is repaid. When you have need, I will stand beside you. Carter grinned. Maybe humans and Valkyrie weren't so different after all. The end. Title: Against the Swarm, a human and an alien's last stand. HFY. Synopsis: on a remote jungle world, a human marine and a Valkyrie warrior find themselves trapped behind enemy lines as an endless horde of insectoid creatures, mindless, relentless, and hungry, descend upon them. Their forces are retreating, evacuation is impossible, and survival is a distant hope. Sergeant James Carter and Commander Zellora stand alone against the swarm, outnumbered 8,000 to 1. Their only chance is to fight until their weapons fail, their blades break, and their strength gives out. Because if they can't hold the line, no one gets out alive. Against the swarm, a human and an alien's last stand. The jungle was alive with the sounds of death. Sergeant James Carter slammed a flash power cell into his rifle, sweat dripping from his brow, as the high-pitched screeches of the swarm echoed through the trees. Their black, chitinous bodies moved like a flood, hundreds of clawed limbs skittering across the foliage, their glowing eyes hungry for the kill. Beside him, Commander Zellora gripped her plasma glaive, the weapon humming with energy. Her mandibles clicked in frustration. Your people are retreating. Ours have abandoned this front. Why do we remain? Carter smirked. Because someone has to hold the line. Zellora exhaled, shaking her head. Foolish human, but she planted her feet beside him, lowering into a combat stance. The swarm was coming, and they were all that stood in its way. The first wave. The jungle exploded into chaos. The first wave of creatures burst from the underbrush, the razor-sharp limbs slashing through the air. Carter fired in controlled bursts, dropping one after another, but for every creature he killed, 10 more took its place. Solara met them head-on, her plasma glaive slicing through the swarm like a scythe. She moved with deadly precision, cutting down anything that got too close. But they just kept coming. Carter's rifle overheated. He cursed, switching to his sidearm. We can't hold them forever. Solara beheaded another beast and snarled, then we make sure they remember us. Digging in, they fell back to the ruins of an old outpost, half buried in vines and decay. Carter used what little time they had to set up explosives along the entrance. Solara crouched beside him, her wounds leaking dark blue blood. Even with these, we will not last long. Carter glanced at her, then at the oncoming horde. We just need to last long enough. The ground trembled. The swarm was almost upon them. He took a deep breath, then he smiled. Hey, Solara. She gave him a sideways look. What? If we die here, I just want to say, he grinned. I told you humans don't run. She let out a sharp, huffing sound. Rakari laughter. Then let us prove it. The swarm reached them. Carter detonated the explosives. The final stand. The explosion tore through the first wave of creatures, sending flaming bodies flying. Carter and Solara fought side by side, cutting down anything that made it through. But the swarm was endless. Carter's pistol clicked empty. He switched to his combat knife. A creature lunged at him. Solara's glaive cut it in half before it could reach him. She was slowing down. So was he. They couldn't win. But they weren't trying to. They were just trying to buy time. Salvation. Just when Carter thought it was over, the sky lit up. Orbital cannons fired from above, streaks of blue energy vaporizing the jungle. Dropships roared overhead, and a familiar voice crackled through Carter's comm. Carter, you still breathing, you stubborn bastard. He let out a breathless laugh. About damn time, Commander. The swarm, caught in the barrage, scattered. Reinforcements had arrived. Carter fell to his knees, exhausted. Solara stood beside him, gripping his shoulder. You fought well, human. He looked up at her and grinned. Told you we don't run? She shook her head, but this time, there was respect in her eyes. The battle was over, but their war had only just begun. The end.